A carton of milk in Bucharest costs roughly $2. In Tel Aviv, nearly $5. Same brand. A country with a GDP per capita of $64,000, richer on paper than Germany, yet 29% more expensive than the OECD average, more expensive than Tokyo, more expensive than Paris. Israel can intercept a ballistic missile mid-flight, but cannot stop the invisible tax at the checkout counter. Because this is not a free market, it is a monopoly trap, engineered across 4 decades, and the corporations running it were never supposed to get caught. On paper, Israel is a triumph of modern capitalism. A country with a GDP per capita projected by the International Monetary Fund at $64,000 for 2026, outpacing Germany, the world's gold standard for industrial prosperity. The myth of Israeli scarcity collapsed years ago. The numbers are unambiguous. Technology exports, venture capital, and defense contracts have pushed the national income into the top tier of the OECD. But the digital mirage ends at the supermarket door. The Taub Center's 2025 State of the Nation report puts Israeli consumer prices at 29% above the OECD average. That is not a rounding error. It is an economic iron dome, shielding entrenched interests while ordinary households take the hit. This is the wealthy-poverty paradox. The country's macroeconomic strength should mean cheaper groceries, more affordable rent, and a middle class that actually feels rich. Instead, the cost of living is calibrated for a global elite, not the people who fill the streets of Tel Aviv or the apartment blocks of Beersheba. Tokyo, once the world's archetype of urban expense, now looks like a bargain compared to the Israeli checkout lane. The OECD Comparative Price Index shows Tokyo's cost of living hovering just above the group's average. Israel sits nearly a third higher. It is not just milk or bread. Housing, transportation, and basic services all carry a premium that is impossible to justify by wages or global inflation. The numbers do not lie. Bread and dairy prices have climbed 8 to 12% a year since 2021, far outpacing wage growth. A chocolate marshmallow treat, Crembo, has become a symbol of the invisible tax, a 59% price increase in 5 years, from roughly $4.40 to $7. Public sector data and supermarket scanner logs confirm the trajectory. Meanwhile, the so-called monopoly tax drains an estimated 12% of disposable income from the lower 92% of Israeli households, while the tech elite, just 8% of the population, floats above the storm. This is not the story of a nation that cannot afford better. It is the story of a system that chooses not to deliver it. The gap between national wealth and everyday price is not a bug. It is the original sin of Israel's economic architecture. The question is not whether the numbers are real, but how such a wealthy society became a global outlier in punishing its own consumers. The search for answers begins with the structures that make this price gap possible, and the actors who profit from it. The roots of Israel's cost of living crisis run deeper than any single price tag. The real story begins in 1985, when a handful of policy architects launched the great privatization experiment. State-owned giants, telecom, chemicals, and banking were auctioned off in a fire sale that minted a new class of oligarchs. The Arison, Ofer, and Dankner families scooped up controlling stakes, weaving pyramids of ownership that spanned entire sectors. By 2010, just 3 business dynasties controlled more than a third of the Tel Aviv Stock Exchange market value. The economic Iron Dome was already under construction, not to shield citizens from foreign threats, but to protect domestic monopolies from competition. Officially, the 2013 anti-concentration law was supposed to break these pyramids. Lawmakers introduced a 30% sectoral share rule and a Herfindahl-Hirschman index trigger, promising to dismantle the old order. But the fine print told a different story. The law's thresholds were set high enough to let the biggest players slip through. A pyramidal divestiture grace period of 18 months gave insiders time to reshuffle assets, spinning off subsidiaries just long enough to pass regulatory muster, only to re-aggregate control through indirect stakes and cross-holdings. Internal memos from the Ministry of Economy flagged these carve-outs as a gift to the tycoons, but the loopholes held. Meanwhile, prices marched upward. Between 2013 and 2018, retail prices for milk, cheese, and bread rose by 4 to 6%, outpacing headline inflation and mocking the law's intent. The monopoly tax tightened its grip. The so-called Cartel of the Essentials, Tanuva, Strauss Group, and Osem Nestlé, replaced the old vertical pyramids with horizontal muscle, locking down 70% of supermarket shelf space for packaged foods. The competition authority's own filings show sectoral concentration levels well above OECD red lines, yet the system delivered only cosmetic divestitures and no real relief. The public's patience snapped in 2011 when the price of a 250-gram container of cottage cheese soared 43% in 5 years. What began as a Facebook page erupted into street protests, drawing over 200,000 signatures and tens of thousands of marches. The Trachtenberg Committee, convened in the wake of the revolt, called for dismantling monopolies and opening imports. The government responded with a temporary price freeze and a watch panel with no teeth. A year later, cottage cheese prices had dipped just 7%, while the broader cost of living continued its upward spiral. Every attempt at reform has carried the fingerprints of its architects, thresholds set just high enough, grace periods just long enough, exemptions just wide enough. The result is a system built to preserve concentration, not to dismantle it. The economic Iron Dome does not intercept missiles. It intercepts competition, locking Israeli consumers into a permanent state of wealthy poverty. The next layer of the conspiracy is not about market forces. It is about the collusion that flourished in the spaces left by policy design. February 2025. The Israel Competition Authority unseals indictments against the CEOs of Victory and Yochanan, Eyal Ravid and Eitan Yochanan, accusing them of orchestrating a price-fixing cartel, not in smoke-filled backrooms, but in full view of the nation. The method is pure public signaling, rather than whispered deals. Facebook posts, radio interviews, and press releases become the new cartel handshake. Ravid warns of import cost volatility on Channel 12. Days later, Yochanan calls for sector-wide price stability on national radio. Each statement is time-stamped and broadcast, and then, almost on cue, mirrored in the checkout lanes across their competitors. The authorities' forensic team pulls point-of-sale scanner data from every major chain. The evidence is clinical. After each public signal, rival supermarkets adjust prices for the same products within an average lag of 18 hours. This is not a market responding to supply shocks, but a synchronized dance choreographed in public. The event study regression leaves little room for doubt. Price moves cluster within a 12 to 24-hour window, peaking at 18 hours. Dr. Miriam Levy, a competition law professor, calls it the textbook signature of algorithmic collusion via public signals. Algorithms scrape the media, ingest the CEO's words, and update prices ahead of the next sales cycle. The legal case hinges on this rhythm. In a competitive market, price changes would scatter, each chain reacting to its own costs. Here, the pattern is too tight, too deliberate. The CEO's defense of independent commercial judgment wilts against the data. The authority's indictment alleges a concerted practice. Public statements as coded instructions, algorithms as enforcers, and consumers as unwitting hostages. The economic Iron Dome, once designed to intercept missiles, now shields the cartel of the essentials from real competition. Price fixing has gone digital, and the invisible tax at the register is no accident. It is the original sin of a system built to betray its own citizens. Tenuva, Strauss Group, and Osem Nestlé command the supermarket shelves like a private syndicate. Together, they control about 70% of Israel's packaged food market, a triopoly so entrenched that even the competition authorities' own filings read like a confession. These are not anonymous logos in a spreadsheet. They are the architects of the cartel of the essentials, the real authors of the grocery bill that haunts Israeli families. The price of Krembo, once an innocent childhood treat, now stands as a barometer of systemic abuse, a 59% surge in 5 years from 3.5 shekels in 2021 to 5.6 shekels in 2026. According to Nielsen and StoreNext scanner data, the official receipts are buried, but the trajectory is public knowledge. Every year, the cost climbs faster than inflation, faster than wages, and far faster than any plausible rise in sugar, cocoa, or dairy inputs. This is not a series of isolated price hikes. It is the outcome of a market where 3 conglomerates set the rhythm, and everyone else dances to their tune. Dairy, snacks, bottled water. Each category is locked down by a single gatekeeper, insulated by regulatory moats and distribution bottlenecks. The monopoly tax is not a metaphor. It is a line item, draining up to 12% of disposable income from the 92% of Israelis who do not work in tech. For the 8% who do, the pain is theoretical. For everyone else, it is the invisible tax at the checkout counter, the economic Iron Dome that intercepts competition, not threats. The result is a system where price is not a reflection of cost, but an expression of power. The cartel of the essentials is not a rumor. It is the original sin of Israel's consumer economy, written in every receipt and every empty wallet. The supermarket shelf is not a free market. It is a border checkpoint, manned by a handful of gatekeepers who decide what gets in and at what price. Diplomat and Shestovitz, 2 of Israel's largest import distributors, have built a business model around keeping foreign competition out. In 2025, the Israel Competition Authority handed down a penalty of $15.7 million, an unprecedented fine for anti-competitive agreements that blocked parallel imports. The case files are blunt. These firms pressured multinational brands to cut off supply to any third-party importer who dared to offer Israeli consumers a cheaper alternative. The result is clear. The price floor for imported staples is not set by global markets, but by the private interests of a local cartel. It is not just about chocolate bars or breakfast cereal. When a parallel import shipment is intercepted, the shelf price for that product stays artificially high, sometimes 30% above what a shopper would pay in Berlin or Madrid. The economic Iron Dome, once designed to protect against existential threats, now shields the distribution oligopoly from the most basic threat of all, competition. Official Israel Competition Authority memos describe a system where import licenses are currency, and access to shelf space is a privilege, not a right. This is not a relic of the past. It is the daily operating procedure. The monopoly tax is baked into every imported good, from shampoo to spaghetti. The gatekeeper monopoly does not just block cheaper goods. It sets the external price floor that every domestic conglomerate can safely price above. The system is airtight. When the border is closed to competition, every Israeli household pays a premium, and the cartel of the essentials pockets the difference. The invisible tax at the register is not an economic accident. It is the original sin of a market designed to keep outsiders out and prices up. Kosher certification in Israel is not a matter of faith alone. It is a regulatory moat, policed by the chief rabbinate, with the power to decide what enters the national diet. In late 2025, the rabbinate tightened its guidelines again. New rules required extra lab tests, ingredient traceability, site supervision for any imported product seeking a kosher stamp. For multinational brands, the new compliance regime added an immediate 8 to 12% premium, just to clear the shelf. Snack makers in Belgium or Poland, already facing a maze of import paperwork, now had to pay for local inspectors and specialized batch runs, or abandon the market altogether. Domestic giants, Tenuva, Strauss, Osem, Nestlé, had their certification pipelines built in, absorbing costs at scale and passing only part of the burden to consumers. The rest became a silent tax, inflating the price of everything from baby formula to bottled water. But the kosher tax is only one layer of the economic Iron Dome. The next is the war premium, a cost shock that arrives on the heels of every security crisis. After the October 2023 conflict, Strauss Group hiked its snack portfolio by 14%, citing fuel surcharges, insurance hikes, and security logistics. Lobby 99's monitoring caught the pattern. In the 6 weeks after the fighting, food prices across the board jumped by double digits, while the official narrative blamed global supply chains. The price hikes never fully retreated. Each crisis reset the floor and the new normal became permanent. The monopoly tax, the kosher tax, the war premium, each one compounds, never subtracts. Bureaucracy and crisis together form the architecture of sticky prices, locking Israeli households into a system where every shock, every new rule, is another excuse to raise the bar. In the boardrooms and rabbinic offices, the cost of living is not a side effect, it is the business model. The state is not a bystander in Israel's cost of living drama, it is the central actor. The July 2025 Slavin Committee, convened to break the grip of the cartel of the essentials, delivered a report thick with recommendations. Stricter enforcement of the anti-concentration law, transparent pricing, and a green light for parallel imports. But the Ministry of Economy withheld key memos, citing political fallout and the risk to government revenue. The report was shelved, its findings unimplemented. Reform became another casualty of bureaucratic inertia, and the monopoly tax remained untouched. The government's role as a market gatekeeper runs even deeper. The Israel Land Authority, a relic of the 1960 land law, controls roughly 93% of the country's land. With such concentrated ownership, the release of new plots for housing is rationed like a wartime commodity. Housing supply stays tight, rents climb, and the cost of shelter bleeds into every corner of the Consumer Price Index. Academic studies peg the Israel Land Authority's policies as adding a 30 to 40% premium to Israeli housing costs, a burden that ripples outward. Higher rents mean higher grocery delivery fees, steeper transportation costs, and a relentless upward pull on the entire cost of living basket. Attempts to tax vacant land, like the 1.5% levy proposed in the Slavin report, never materialized. Internal documents reveal a pattern. Every committee, every panel, every reform is suffocated by the same logic. Protect the fiscal base, preserve land value, keep the system intact. In this architecture, the state is less a regulator than a tycoon in its own right. The economic Iron Dome does not just shield the cartel of the essentials from competition, it shields itself, locking Israeli households into a structure where the price of land, like the price of bread, is set from above. Israel's economic miracle is a tale told in averages, but averages conceal as much as they reveal. The digital mirage of national wealth, $64,000 per capita, casts a long shadow over a country where only 8% of the population, the tech elite, actually live in the world the statistics promise. For the other 92%, the monopoly tax is not an abstraction. It is a monthly subtraction, draining 12% of disposable income from families who never see a shekel of venture capital or stock options. The cartel of the essentials writes the bill, but it is the squeezed majority who pay it. The economic Iron Dome can intercept rockets with laser precision, yet it cannot shield a kindergarten teacher in Petah Tikva from a grocery bill that outpaces her paycheck. The divide is not just economic, it is moral. Israel's original sin is not scarcity, but engineered inequality, a system that rewards the few and leaves the rest to ration hope at the checkout lane. March 2026. The Supreme Court of Israel issues a decision that slices through decades of regulatory fog. For the first time, a legal standard draws a line in the sand. Any price on an essential good that exceeds its foreign benchmark by more than 50%, without clear cost justification, can be challenged as unfair excessive pricing. The court's language is clinical, but the implications are seismic. No more hiding behind vague claims of market conditions or unique local costs. Now, every shekel above that threshold is a potential liability, not just a profit margin. The judgment gives the competition authority a new weapon and opens the class action floodgates. Dairy and snack conglomerates, long insulated by the economic Iron Dome, face the real threat of collective redress. For the first time, the architecture of the cartel of the essentials is exposed to judicial sunlight. The original sin, systemic overpricing, now carries legal risk, not just public anger. Israel's GDP per capita now eclipses Germany's, yet the monopoly tax, 29% above the OECD norm, extracts more at every checkout than any kosher tax or war premium. The Crembo price spike isn't a glitch. It's the cartel of the essentials at work, an economic Iron Dome shielding the 8% tech elite, as 92% face wealthy poverty. Israel can intercept missiles, but not the shadow cartel's invisible tribute. The real blockade is internal.